Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Contrarian entitled Sage of Shekhinah. This is the fifth studio album from this Greek-American technical and progressive death metal crew, hailing primarily from Rochester, New York. I came to know Contrarian after having heard their third studio album, Their Worm Never Dies, back in 2019. I also thoroughly enjoyed subsequent album, Only Time Will Tell, released just over a year later. I remember also seeing Contrarian open for Suffocation and Atheist last year when they performed at the Velvet Underground here in Toronto. I have been told by Jim Tacikas, their guitarist, that I also met him and we were introduced and we might have hung out or something. At least that's what it says in the email that I got from him. I don't really remember that, to be honest, but I'm going to take his word for it because, I was drunk, I was on my honeymoon, I was at a death metal show with my wife, who I had just married because we were on our honeymoon. So, I probably just forgot, plain and simple. Long story short, Contrarian, cool band, Jim, cool dude. As such, I was pretty thoroughly pumped for this new studio album, Sage of Shekhinah. They've got a mostly new lineup with a new singer, a new drummer, and a returning bassist. They've got a new attitude, a new vibe. They've refined everything that has made previous albums work so well, and they've introduced a ton of new elements as well. For one, this is a more spiritual record for Contrarian, with a lot of influence taken notably from religious texts and stories. Now, please feel free to expand upon and further explain what I'm saying, or to outright correct me if need be, because world religion is not my specialty. But from what I can gather, there are direct references to the island of Patmos, which is where John of Patmos famously wrote the Book of Revelations in the New Testament. There are references to the Sabor, the Islamic holy book of David. There are references to Gehenna, the outer valley surrounding ancient Jerusalem. The title track, and obviously the album's title, makes reference to the Shekhinah, which is a concept found in Judaism. The Hebrew Bible mentions several places where the presence of God was felt and experienced as a Shekhinah, including the burning bush and the cloud that rested on Mount Sinai. The Shekhinah was often pictured as a cloud or a pillar of fire and was referred to as the glory of God. The Shekhinah was also understood to be present in the tabernacle and the temple in Jerusalem and to be seated at the right hand of God. And all of this works together to make the album feel extra massive, extra cinematic, extra important, while also simultaneously bringing Contrarian back down to earth a little bit and grounding them in concepts that are more tangible. No longer are we dealing with issues of theology and philosophy through high-concept fantasy, sci-fi, nerdy jibber-jabber. Now we're just actually dealing with it in a way that still feels grandiose and epic. And this is all complemented musically by some fiery and insane tech death noodling and jamming and battering. Contrarian have always worn their heart on their sleeves. They've always had a colossal hard-on for, early 90s death, cynic and atheist records like Spiritual Healing, Focus, Piece of Time, and that has absolutely not changed on Contrarian, but I don't fucking care because all of those records rule. Plenty of jazzy inflections, prominent bass, melodies and solos, and high-octane guitar pyrotechnics and shredathons to be found on this thing. Production-wise, too, this actually does have a more stripped-down and visceral kind of feel and approach, very similar to some of the records that we've mentioned. You've got In Gehenna, for instance, which is a wrecking ball, a roller coaster of over-the-top, destructive, tech-death savagery and mayhem. It spends a good chunk of time kind of bouncing back and forth between some more melodramatic, bass-driven prog metal and some more blistering death metal brutality, perplexing, battering, and exciting all of your senses along the way. Then there's Ibn al-Rawandi, which feels a bit more cosmic, a bit more celestial, shall we say, with slower sections, more methodical arrangements. It's still vicious and brutal, it just happens to also take its time and be a little bit more meditative. Then there's Apollonius of Tyana, which throws in some more theatrical and epic vocal dynamics without compromising any of the brutality and menace. In fact, if anything, I'd say vocally this is one of the most impressive cuts on the record, and clearly realizing this, the rest of Contrarian goes out of their way to deliver tons of gnarly solos and melodies and harmonies and little bass grooves and riffs and all kinds of shit. Then there's Madman from Island Patmos, which closes out the album on fiery and, dare I say, maddening tech death and prog death bombast. There are some classic heavy metal gallops and rhythms thrown in, which I also really like. Gives this whole thing kind of a Sound of Perseverance feel, but also maybe just a little bit of a mellow death underbite. If we're being honest though, my favorite thing about this album musically is how it opens. The title track, Sage of Shekhinah, which also opens the album, spends at least a minute of time on some dazzling, almost mystical, kind of Mediterranean instrumentation, which gives this thing so much flavor and atmosphere. Like, I love the frantic energy it has. I love the subtle synthesizers. I love the acoustic guitar shredding and plucking. It's really cool. I honestly wish there were more moments like this across the entire album. Overall, this is yet another Contrarian album that I have thoroughly enjoyed, and I would go as far as to say that this is probably their best album to date. At the very least, it is my favorite of theirs to date. I'm feeling a pretty strong, solid 4 out of 5 on this. I love the raw, stripped-down, organic production. I love how punchy it is. I love all the constant shredding. I love how passionate the performances are. I love how nuanced the actual songwriting is. I really like a lot of the concepts, and I look forward to exploring this album further in the future after maybe learning more about a lot of the themes and stories that these songs are referring to. Musically speaking, while it may not be as inventive or as ambitious as some other prog death and tech death that we've seen in the last couple of years, it's still extremely well done, extremely entertaining. I would kind of look at this as being like to 90s tech death and prog death metal what last year's Undeath record was to old school death metal in that regard. Basically, if everything I've mentioned sounds cool and exciting and awesome to you, you're very likely to enjoy this album. Definitely check it out. 4 out of 5. I think it's fucking great. Honestly, I enjoyed the shit out of this. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.